Hi, so in this video we're going to take a look at the use of expressions within Loadit. So we've got some data here which just contains some customer records, and probably the first place that you're going to encounter expressions within Loadit is within the Derived Columns module. So if I just add one of those in here, you'll see that what it shows us is we have a list of input columns here and a list of derived columns here. Obviously there are none here at the minute because I haven't created any. So let's suppose we want to create a simple derived column. This one's going to be a column called full name, which is which we want to be a concatenation of title, first name and surname. So the way to go about this is to type an expression here in the expression bar. Now, one way of thinking about this is it's a bit like the expression bar here in Excel. So, for example, in here I could put in, the expression Fred blogs, and and Excel would populate that with the value Fred blogs. And then I could copy that down to as many rows as I wanted to. So it's a similar sort of idea here in Loadit. I could type in an expression Fred blogs, the only difference being that I don't need to type the equals, that's just sort of assumed by Loadit. And when I press enter, it's like Loadit is applying that expression and doing an autofill across all of the columns in the data. So that's quite a useful way to think about it. I want to take title, first name and surname. Now I could type in here title, first name. That's starting to get a little bit awkward. So this expression bar is quite good for just simple expressions. But once I want to build up more complicated expressions, it's useful to click the wizard toolbar here. So in here, this opens up the standard Loadit expression helper, and there's various things going on here which I'll talk you through as we go through. But for now, the first thing to notice is that we have a list of columns available to us, and this is very similar to Excel, where let's say we have a column here, a column here, a column here, and so our expression might be A2 and space and B2 and space and C2. And then you get Mr. Fred blogs, and then again you could auto fill that down. So really Loadit is no different, except rather than talking about cell references, Loadit works with sort of full column references. So I would put in title and space and first name and another space and surname. So there we go. And there we go. We get a list of the full name populated there as we'd expect. Now, one thing that's also worth knowing is that in derived columns here, by default all the input columns are displayed here and no derived columns are displayed, and in this tab all the derived columns and no source columns are displayed. That's just a default, and you can override that by going to this view menu here and picking source columns that you want to see, and this is quite useful for checking checking your output values here. And so I can see that indeed, like this first row here, Mr. James Adams, Mrs. Angela Brown, and so on, that all sort of adds up. So that's good. So that's the first step. That's me just concatenating together or sort of working with input columns and joining those together. We can also do mathematical things here in Loadit. I don't know, let's just put in column called math test. Doesn't really matter, it's just for illustration. And you know, I can type in 100 minus 10 plus 3, and again, just like Excel, it calculates the value sort of as you'd expect. So let's do the equivalent here in Excel. There you go, 93, 93, brilliant. So that's how you work with sort of simple fields and operators within Excel. Within Loadit. But then beyond this, there are more sophisticated things that you can do using functions. So within Excel, there is a whole set of functions that you can use. So for example, a really simple one here is the lower function. So let's take first name Fred there and pass that into the lower function, and you can see it returns the lowercase version of the input text. Obviously you've got a function here with an input value, and then it returns an output value depending on what that function does to the input value. And Loadit is exactly the same. So for example, we might add a let's say first name lower function, column, and then we might use from within here, I should just say on the right hand side here, these are where all the functions live in, and they're all categorized into folders. So within the string folder here we have a lower function, exactly the same as Excel, and I can double click that, and that will bring the function into the expression window here, and it will give me a clue as to what the parameters are for this function. So just like Excel, all I need to do is pass in a single value. Let's take first name and say OK, and there you can see that the function is converting the first name values that are being passed in into a lowercase equivalent. Now all of these functions are listed on our website, so if you're unsure about what they do or what the parameters are, obviously you can look them up there. If you're really unsure, you can contact us at support, and if you feel that there's a function that's missing, again you can contact us on support, and we're always interested in adding new functions to this list. So just let us know. So that's the process of just passing values into functions and getting return values. Obviously lower is quite a simple function, and Loadit contains functions of varying levels of sophistication. One that's very useful is a VLOOKUP, which again has a sort of equivalent in Excel. So let's say, for example, we want to convert the value here, which is region, north, south, east and west, to a region code here. Now in my package I've got set up a set of lookup values here. So we go north, south, east and west, 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. So what I want to do is basically do a lookup on, let's just do that same trick again and bring in region. There we go. I want to perform a lookup here on region and create a numeric coded version of that field. So if I create a field called region code, and I can make that a number, then when I go into the expression editor, within this lookup and reference, there's a VLOOKUP function. Now when I double click this one, I get a whole load of stuff in here, so I can immediately see this is a lot more sophisticated than just the simple lower function that I used a minute ago. With functions like this that actually require quite a lot of settings, you'll notice when I select them here in the expression helper, there's a little function helper here that appears that sort of lights up. So when that lights up, I can click it, and I get a dialog here that allows me to set the parameters just using the settings here in this window. So I want to, in this particular case, I want to take region lookup against the region lookup, lookup against region in this data, lookup region in the lookup data, and then return region code from the lookup data, and then if it's unmatched, select 999. So when I press OK there, you see that it populates all of those parameters for me. Also, if I want to change this, I can just click the function helper, and then it brings it back up again. So for these more advanced functions, I shouldn't really need to get into the details of typing these manually. The little helper should help me through that. So when I press OK, you can see that west is 4, east is 2, south is 3, and so on and so forth. So that's fairly sophisticated stuff, and that takes us quite far, and that is probably the main use of expressions within Loadit that you'll encounter. Obviously, that's not the only place where they'll pop up. We have, for example, a split module here, where if I drag that in and link that to our derived columns, what the split module allows you to do is specify partitions of the data, so little buckets that each row might go into. So let's say, for example, I want a bucket called north and south. Then what I can do is enter in here an expression where that expression is true, a given record will be put into this bucket. So again, I could type an expression in directly here, or I could, when I click the expression helper, just do that again. When I click the expression helper, I get the same expression helper window that we saw a minute ago in derived columns, and that's a deliberate thing. So throughout Loadit, you'll see exactly the same expression helper everywhere where you are allowed to enter an expression. So that means that once you've got the hang of it in one place, you can apply that knowledge everywhere within Loadit. So what I want to do is say, okay, anywhere where region code is in 1 or 3, which is north and south, where that's true, then put that data into this north and south split. Similarly, I could say east and west, and again I could say region code in 2 and 4. Sorry, 2, 4. There we go. So yeah, we've got 1 and 3 going into north and south, and then 2 and 4 going into east and west. And so there you can see that our original 1000 records then get split into 2 outputs of 410 and 590. When I look at that data, you can see all the north and south there, and all the east and west there. So again, that's just another example of where the expression syntax just pops up again. So the next place where you might see expressions being used is within the configuration of a module. So if I drag in a CSV file here, and I link that to the north and south output, I can just output this to, let's say, N and S, and away we go. That's fine. So whenever I run this, I'll get a file called nns.csv. But actually, I might want to make this a bit more dynamic rather than just a literal hard-coded path. I might want to make this the path generated dynamically at runtime. And the clue here that tells me that that's possible within this particular setting is the fact that I see the wizard icon here again. And when I click on that, guess what? We see the same expression helper as before. And what this allows me to do is create an expression which will get evaluated when the package runs, and that will generate an output path property in this case. So I might say north and south, and let's say, for example, I wanted to include in the file path a count of the number of records that that file contains. So I might actually say brackets, and let's say, I don't know, count, and within that count is asking me to pass in an output reference. So I'm actually going to pass an output reference to the CSV output itself, and then say plus close brackets. So it goes blue there to tell me that it's happy that that's a valid expression, and I can click this little magnifying glass here to evaluate that expression here in the editor. So you can see that when this gets evaluated, that count function here is counting the number of records in the CSV target. So this target itself, and is evaluating to 410. So that is the number of records that file contains. So I might just want to make that a little bit more human readable. At any point I can click this check expression button here, which obviously tells me whether or not the expression I've entered is valid. And again, there you go. You see, that's a nice, neat output file path. Obviously, you know, you can use any of the functions or expressions or any of the values available to you in that file path. An alternative technique, if is that you may see, is to actually embed an expression within a constant. So I might have a value like this, and rather than concatenate it together, I might include the expression part of it here in question marks. So what I'm doing is saying that this part of it is just fixed, and then the stuff in question marks is stuff that I want Loadit to evaluate. Now if I say OK to that, you'll see that now this part is blue. So this is a sort of a different way of approaching it. You can have if you don't want the whole thing to be an expression, you could specify the fixed bits just as hard-coded text, and tell Loadit that there's a special bit that needs to be evaluated by denoting it in double question marks like that. And again, it evaluates to the same thing. Now that's a matter of taste. You may or may not prefer that. Different people prefer different things. And then the last thing that I'll just show you is the concept of variables. So if I go up here into view variables, you'll see a list of the variables that are available to me. There's a certain set of system variables that are just pre-built. So maybe we'll just use one of those to begin with. So if I go back to how this was, hang on. So let's say I want to, instead of all that stuff there, I want to just put the username, append the username to this file path. Let's say I want in here, I just want north and south underscore, and then the username of the person who has run this package. So here within system you've got username, and then I just double click that and paste that in, and you can see again that resolves to north and south underscore Tim. So that then will be the path that gets generated for that target when this package runs. Obviously they are the inbuilt system variables. I can add my own if I want. We could, I don't know, we could have project name, just making this up, but we can have project name, important project. That's not an expression, that's just a literal value. So now by doing that, I have a variable defined, and then from within my expression here, if I want to, instead of a username, I could paste in my own custom variable there. And then when we look at that with the little magnifying glass, you can see important project has been appended on there, which is what I want. And so there are all sorts of ways in Loadit that I might populate that variable. I could populate it by prompting the user when the package opens. Maybe that's something that changes every time and I want them to type that in. Or I could populate it using a pre-processing task that sets that variable via an expression. So maybe I could take the current date, or I could go to the database and look up a value and bring that in, or I could just run this. I could run this package on the command line and have some command line logic that generates the value for that parameter, that variable, and then passes it in, and that will get picked up when it runs. But either way, there's plenty of flexibility and plenty of scope. So the key thing to remember there is that the key thing to remember there is that where you see these magic wand and the magnifying glass, then that is the clue that there's a property or a setting there that can be made dynamic rather than just hard coded. So that's it. They're the bare bones of how to work with expressions within Loadit. Hope that helps. Obviously, any questions, get in touch with us at support. Thank you very much.